The Rio night air clung to Brian O'Connor's skin like a warm promise as he stepped through the floor-to-ceiling windows onto the penthouse balcony. Behind him, the celebration pulsed with life, Dom's booming laugh cutting through music. Roman sprawled across leather furniture, recounting the vault heist for the third time. Tej hunched over his laptop, verifying the final cash count. Somewhere in the back bedroom, Mia was showering off the dust and adrenaline of the last 48 hours. Freedom tasted like expensive champagne and felt like weight finally lifting from shoulders that had carried too much for too long. Brian's hands found the balcony railing, knuckles going white against cool metal. Below, Rio de Janeiro sprawled in endless glittering chaos, favelas climbing hillsides like living organisms, the Christ statue watching from Corcovado with the indifference of stone. They'd just stolen $100 million from a corrupt politician who would never report it missing. They'd won. They were free. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Not the burner. Not the clean phone Dom had given him 3 days ago when they'd agreed to retire, to disappear, to finally live. This was the other phone. The one Brian should have thrown into the ocean but hadn't, because old habits die hard, and federal agents, even former federal agents, never truly trust silence. The screen glowed harsh white in the darkness. An encrypted frequency. DSS Internal Communication Protocol. Black Ops classification. The kind reserved for operations that didn't officially exist. Brian's blood turned to ice water. He shouldn't be receiving this. His federal credentials had been burned the moment he'd chosen Dom over the badge in Los Angeles, nearly a decade ago now, though the weight of that choice felt both ancient and immediate, like yesterday and a lifetime ago compressed into the same breath. This frequency was reserved for active counterterrorism operations, the kind that bypassed congressional oversight and left no paper trail, the kind that ended with body bags and closed casket funerals and families who never got answers. His thumb hovered over the screen. Every instinct screamed to delete it, to throw the phone off the balcony and watch it shatter 40 stories below. But Brian had been an agent long enough to know that ignorance wasn't protection. It was just a slower death. He opened the message. The encryption took 6 seconds to decode. 6 seconds where Brian's heart hammered against his ribs like it was trying to escape. 6 seconds where the celebration behind him grew louder, Roman's voice carrying through the glass. "Man, I'm gonna buy an island. A whole damn island." The message rendered, classified, Black Ops authorization, director clearance only, operation, nightfall, target designation, Toretto crew, status, code red liquidation authorized, execution window, 48 hours. Ideological contagion risk destabilization of international financial systems, collateral assessment, acceptable. He read it again, then a third time, searching for ambiguity, for misinterpretation, for any explanation other than the one burning itself into his brain like acid eating through steel. They were going to kill everyone, not arrest, not prosecute, kill Dom, Mia, Roman, Tej, Han. Every person currently laughing and drinking and celebrating their freedom was marked for execution by the same government Brian had once served with pride. The rationale scrolled past in bureaucratic language that turned mass murder into policy. The Rio heist had been too public, too successful, too inspirational. Social media was erupting with hashtags celebrating them as modern-day Robin Hoods. Underground racing crews from Sao Paulo to Shanghai were planning copycat operations. The financial markets had trembled, not from the $100 million they'd stolen, but from the idea they represented. That the powerful could be beaten, that the system wasn't invincible, that ordinary people could win. The shadow cabal that pulled strings from behind classified doors had made their decision. The Toretto crew was no longer just criminals. They were a symbol, and symbols were more dangerous than any bullet. Brian's mind shifted into tactical assessment mode, the cold precision of a man who'd spent a decade hunting people just like himself. The liquidation order would deploy through DSS channels. Hobbs would receive authorization within hours. But Hobbs was just the tip. CIA wetwork teams were probably already boarding flights. International assets would be activated. Within 48 hours, this safe house would be hit by operators who made Hobbs look like a rookie. There would be no warning, no negotiation, no mercy. The mission parameters were clear. Eliminate targets. Stage it as a firefight. Blame it on Rio's criminal underworld seeking revenge for Reyes' death. Clean. Surgical. Untraceable. Brian looked back through the window. Mia had emerged from the bedroom, hair still damp from the shower, moving toward Dom with that smile she saved only for family. She said something Brian couldn't hear, and Dom pulled her close, protective even in victory. Brian's sister-in-law. His brother, because that's what Dom was now, blood or not. His family. The phone felt like a live grenade in his hand. 48 hours. He could run, grab Mia, convince Dom, scatter the crew before the hammer fell. But Brian knew the game better than that. The moment any of them moved suspiciously, the execution window would collapse. They'd be hunted across every border, tracked through every financial system, isolated and eliminated one by one. Running only worked if you were alone. And Brian was never going to let his family die. His mind shifted into a different mode. Not the mode of a man celebrating freedom, but the mode of a federal agent who'd spent years inside the most dangerous criminal organizations in the world. The mode that had kept him alive undercover, when one wrong word meant a bullet. The mode that turned impossible situations into calculated probabilities. He needed to change the equation. Not save everyone. That was impossible against this kind of power. But save them. The solution materialized with cruel clarity. If the target list was the problem, eliminate the targets. Not through death, through irrelevance. Make the crew disappear from the system entirely. Erase every database entry, every biometric scan, every thread that connected them to the Rio operation, and create a new target. One so compelling, so dangerous, so perfectly designed to absorb every ounce of attention that the original targets would fade into blessed obscurity. Brian O'Connor, former FBI agent turned rogue mastermind. The story would write itself. A federal golden boy who'd gone native, who'd infiltrated and corrupted the Toretto crew, who'd orchestrated the Rio heist as the opening move in a campaign of international terrorism. The crew would be victims, manipulated by a trained operative who'd used them as pawns. It was perfect. Too perfect. The kind of narrative that intelligence agencies fed to the media when they needed to explain away their failures. A traitor in the ranks was always more palatable than admitting they'd lost to a bunch of street racers. Brian would give them their villain, and in exchange, his family would vanish. The balcony door opened behind him. Dom's voice, rough with celebration and beer, "You good, brother?" Couldn't. If he looked Dom in the eye right now, the whole plan would collapse under the weight of everything he was about to destroy. "Yeah," Brian said quietly, forcing normalcy into his voice. "Just taking it all in. Hell of a view." Dom stepped beside him, shoulder to shoulder. Two brothers watching the city that had made them rich and free. "We did it, Brian. We're actually done." Brian's throat tightened. "Yeah, we did." Dom clapped him on the shoulder, that grip that meant family, that meant ride or die, that meant everything Brian was about to betray to save. "Get some sleep," Dom said. "Tomorrow we start planning the rest of our lives." He walked back inside, laugh rejoining the celebration. Brian waited until the sound faded. Then he moved. 12 minutes to execute the digital scorched earth. He pulled out the sterile phone, purchased cash from a Rio electronics market, never connected to any network, and accessed tools he'd sworn he'd never use again. Federal back doors, classified override codes, the skeleton keys to America's digital surveillance infrastructure. First, database purges. He tunneled through proxy servers into the DSS central repository, fingers moving with mechanical precision, found the Toretto crew's files, biometric data, photo arrays, known associates, financial trails. His finger hovered over the delete command. This was irreversible. Once he wiped this data, there was no going back. No claiming it was a misunderstanding. No redemption arc. He pressed delete. The files dissolved into corrupted fragments that would take forensic teams months to reconstruct. Time his family would use to scatter like smoke. Now for the harder part. Brian positioned himself in front of the safe house security camera and hit record. The red light blinked on. When he spoke, his voice carried none of the warmth from an hour ago. This was Special Agent Brian O'Connor, cold and professional, delivering a confession that would destroy him. "My name is Brian O'Connor, former special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This is my voluntary statement regarding Operation Nightfall and my role in the systematic destabilization of international financial systems through the exploitation of civilian assets." The words tasted like poison. He manufactured details, false bank accounts, fabricated communications with fictitious terrorist cells, a conspiracy theory that would take investigators years to disprove, by which time the narrative would be set in stone. I take full responsibility for the recruitment, training, and operational deployment of the individuals previously designated as the Toretto crew. They were unwitting participants in a long-term intelligence operation designed to identify vulnerabilities in corrupt governmental systems. The camera captured every micro-expression, every controlled breath. Brian had interrogated enough suspects to know what guilt looked like. He gave them a perfect performance. As of this moment, I am operating independently. Any attempts to apprehend me should be conducted with the understanding that I am a trained federal operative with comprehensive knowledge of law enforcement protocols, surveillance systems, and tactical response procedures. He let that threat hang in the air, not because he meant it, but because it would force them to deploy maximum resources. Every agent hunting Brian O'Connor was an agent not hunting his family. This is my final communication. He stopped the recording, uploaded it to anonymous servers with delayed release protocols. In 6 hours, this video would flood every intelligence agency in the Western Hemisphere. By morning, Brian's face would be on every news channel. The most wanted man alive. 60 seconds to grab his go bag from the hidden compartment behind the bedroom closet. 30 seconds to pocket burner phones and classified access codes. 15 seconds to pull his FBI badge from where he'd buried it at the bottom of his duffel. A reminder of who he'd been. He placed the badge on the hood of Dom's Charger in the underground garage. No note, no explanation. Just the badge, reflecting fluorescent light like an accusation. Then Brian O'Connor walked into the Rio night and became a ghost. The morning sun hit Dominic Toretto's face through windows that cost more than most people's houses, and for exactly 3 seconds, he felt peace. Then he remembered. The celebration had ended around 4 a.m. Bodies sprawled across furniture like a battlefield's aftermath. Roman was snoring on the sectional, one arm dangling off the edge. Tage had passed out with his laptop still open, cryptocurrency charts frozen mid-scroll. Han had disappeared sometime after midnight, silent as always, probably already halfway to Tokyo. Dom pushed himself upright, head pounding from expensive whiskey and exhaustion. Mia was still asleep in the guest room. The penthouse was quiet except for Roman's freight train breathing and the distant hum of Rio waking up below. Something felt wrong. Dom couldn't name it yet, just that instinct he'd learned to trust during 20 years of living on the edge of legal and illegal. That sixth sense that had kept him alive when it shouldn't have. The air felt different, emptier. He checked the balcony first. Empty. Then the garage. His Charger sat in its usual spot, black paint gleaming under industrial lighting. But something was on the hood. Small, metallic, catching the fluorescent glow like a piece of evidence at a crime scene. Dom's boots echoed as he crossed the concrete. The object came into focus. An FBI badge. Brian's FBI badge. Dom picked it up, the weight familiar from the 100 times he'd seen Brian flash it during undercover operations, back when trust was currency and badges were weapons. The photo was younger, Brian fresh from Quantico, clean cut and still believing in justice. No note, no explanation, just the badge. Dom's hands started shaking. He pulled out his phone, dialing Brian's number with fingers that suddenly felt clumsy. Straight to voicemail. He tried the burner they'd set up for emergency contact. Deadline. The backup number. Disconnected. Brian! Dom's voice cracked as he shouted into the garage's emptiness. Brian! Nothing but his own echo answering back. He ran to the penthouse, throwing open the bedroom where Brian had been sleeping. Empty. Bed made with military precision, corners tucked tight, closet bare except for wire hangers. Bathroom counter wiped clean, not even a toothbrush left behind. Every trace of Brian O'Connor was gone. Dom's heart hammered. Kidnapping? Ambush? Some Rio cartel looking for revenge after Reyes's death. He grabbed his pistol from the safe, ready to tear the city apart block by block. The TV turned itself on. Dom spun, gun raised. But there was no intruder. Just the television, volume blasting, tuned to CNN International. Breaking news banner, red alert graphics, the kind of production value reserved for terrorist attacks and presidential assassinations. Brian's face filled the screen. Former FBI Special Agent Brian O'Connor, now the subject of an international manhunt, following the release of a shocking confession video. Dom's world tilted sideways. The video played. Brian, sitting in what looked like a hotel room, speaking directly to the camera with a cold professionalism Dom had never seen before. Not even during Brian's undercover days. This was different. Detached. Like watching a stranger wear Brian's face. My name is Brian O'Connor, former Special Agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This is my voluntary statement regarding Operation Nightfall and my role in the systematic destabilization of international financial systems. The words kept coming. Terrorist cells. Manipulation. The Rio heist described as Brian's opening move. The Toretto crew labeled as unwitting participants. Any individuals associated with the Toretto name were victims of my manipulation and should not be held accountable. Dom's fist went through the TV screen. Glass exploded outward. Sparks erupted from the shattered electronics. Roman jolted awake on the couch, shouting something unintelligible. Tage's laptop crashed to the floor. Dom, Mia's voice from the hallway. What's happening? She stopped in the doorway, eyes locking on the destroyed television where Brian's face was frozen mid-confession, glass shards embedded in the screen like ice crystals. No, Mia whispered. No, that's not. The penthouse door exploded inward. Not a knock, not a warning. Just 15 heavily armed DSS agents in tactical gear flooding through the entrance with assault rifles raised. Laser sights painting red dots across Dom's chest like targeting reticles. On the ground. Now. Dom, no! Mia screamed. 3 red dots centered on his forehead. Dom's combat instincts calculated the odds in microseconds. 0. He raised his hand slowly, maintaining eye contact with the lead agent, a woman, mid-40s, professional dead stare that said she'd done this 1,000 times. Dominic Toretto, she said, voice flat and devoid of emotion. Roman Pierce, Mia Toretto, Tej Parker. You're being detained under federal anti-terrorism statutes for questioning regarding your association with fugitive Brian O'Connor. We didn't, Mia started. Save it. The agent gestured. Zip ties materialized in her subordinate's hands. Dom's arms were wrenched behind his back with precision that spoke of thousands of arrests. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it. Roman was shouting legal threats that made no sense. Something about constitutional violations and unlawful detention. Tej was silent, already calculating. Mia was looking at Dom with eyes that asked questions he couldn't answer. And Dom stared at the shattered TV screen where Brian's face was still visible through broken glass. Those blue eyes looking directly at the camera with an expression Dom had seen before, in Los Angeles, when Brian had first gone undercover with his crew. When Brian had been lying with every breath, playing a role, pretending to be someone he wasn't. You're my brother. Ride or die. The memories felt like broken glass now, cutting with every replay. They were separated immediately. Black SUVs, separate routes, standard interrogation protocol, isolate, disorient, extract information while the subject is vulnerable and confused. Dom's vehicle wound through Rio's morning traffic with 3 agents saying nothing, treating him like a bomb that might detonate if they spoke too loud. They'd given him no phone call, no lawyer, no explanation beyond federal terrorism investigation. The safe house was gone. The money was gone. The freedom they'd celebrated 12 hours ago had evaporated like morning fog under sunlight. All that remained was Brian's badge, cold against Dom's palm where he'd shoved it in his pocket before the agents could confiscate it. The vehicle stopped at an abandoned warehouse near the docks. Not a precinct, not a federal building. Somewhere off the books, somewhere answers weren't required and screams wouldn't carry. The interrogation room was empty except for a metal table and 2 chairs bolted to the floor. Dom was shoved into one, the door sealed with a heavy metallic click. 15 minutes of silence. A psychological tactic Dom knew well. Let them stew. Let the fear build. Let them imagine worst-case scenarios until they're ready to talk, just to end the uncertainty. Dom didn't imagine. He planned. If Brian had truly betrayed them, Dom would find him, track him across every continent if necessary. And brothers or not, there would be a reckoning. If Brian hadn't betrayed them, the door opened. Luke Hobbs walked in. Dom's jaw tightened. The last time they'd seen each other, Hobbs had been half-conscious in the Rio streets, watching Dom's crew disappear with $100 million in stolen cash. The DSS agent looked different now. Harder edges, darker circles under his eyes, the weight of professional failure carved into every line of his face. Toretto. Hobbs dropped a file on the table. It landed with a heavy thud that echoed in the small room. "We need to talk about Brian O'Connor." "I've got nothing to say to you." "That's fine. I've got plenty to say to you." Hobbs opened the file. Photos spilled out across the metal surface. Brian in different cities, São Paulo, Buenos Aires, Bogotá, all time-stamped within the last 6 months, all professional surveillance quality. Your brother has been busy. Dom's face stayed neutral, but his mind raced. Those photos were surveillance shots, professional grade with timestamps and location data. Someone had been following Brian for months, which meant, "You've been watching him," Dom said slowly. "You knew about the Rio operation before it happened." Hobbs's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Confirmation without words. "The confession video went live 4 hours ago," Hobbs continued, ignoring the accusation. Since then, O'Connor has been designated Priority Alpha by every intelligence agency in the Western Hemisphere. Interpol has issued a red notice. The FBI has added him to the 10 most wanted list. The reward for information leading to his capture is $20 million. $20 million. More than they'd stolen from Reyes. "You think I'm going to help you find him?" Dom's voice was granite. "I think you're going to tell me everything you know about his operational capabilities, his contacts, his training, and his psychological profile. Because right now, Brian O'Connor is the most dangerous fugitive on the planet, and you're the only person who might know where he's going." Dom leaned forward, chains rattling against the table. "Then you don't know him at all. I know he's a trained federal agent with comprehensive knowledge of law enforcement protocols. I know he's got access to classified systems and the skills to disappear permanently. I know he played you for a fool, Toretto, used your crew as cover for a terrorism operation. And I know that right now, he's out there planning his next move while you sit here protecting someone who betrayed you." The words hit like body blows, each one landing with precision. Used your crew, betrayed you. Dom's hand found Brian's badge in his pocket, thumb tracing the embossed FBI seal. Family is everything. That's what Brian had said 1,000 times, in 1,000 different ways. Through actions more than words, standing between Dom and bullets, taking beatings to protect the crew, risking everything for Mia. Either all of that was a lie, or this was. Dom looked at Hobbs. Really looked. Saw something the agent was trying to hide beneath professional detachment. Uncertainty. "You don't believe it either," Dom said quietly. Hobbs's jaw clenched. "The confession," Dom pressed. "Something about it doesn't sit right with you. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here asking questions. You'd already have your answers." Then, the video went out through encrypted channels 6 hours before O'Connor actually went ghost. That's not operational security. That's a warning shot. Warning who? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Hobbs pulled out another photo. This one was different. Not surveillance, but a screenshot from a federal database. Brian's file. Except huge sections were redacted, entire years of service history blacked out like classified secrets. "This is what's left of O'Connor's federal record," Hobbs said. 2 days ago, this file was comprehensive. Every undercover operation, every commendation, every disciplinary action. Now it looks like Swiss cheese. Someone with serious clearance purged his history. Dom's blood went cold. Who? That's classified above my pay grade, which means this goes higher than DSS, higher than FBI. Hobbs leaned back, studying Dom with the careful attention of a hunter who just realized he might be tracking the wrong prey. "O'Connor's confession video paints you as victims, specifically states you were coerced and manipulated. That's lawyer language. That's someone making sure you've got plausible deniability." The pieces started clicking into place like an engine coming together. Brian's disappearance, the perfectly timed confession, the database purge, the careful wording that painted the crew as innocent dupes. "He's protecting us," Dom said, the realization hitting like a freight train. From what? Dom couldn't answer that. Didn't have the full picture yet. but the shape of it was forming in his mind. Something big enough that Brian would sacrifice everything, including his own reputation, to keep his family safe. Hobbs stood. "I've got orders to track O'Connor by any means necessary. Those orders come from people who don't take no for an answer." He paused at the door. "But I've also got questions those same people really don't want me asking. So here's what's going to happen. I'm cutting you loose. All of you. No charges, no restrictions." Why? Because Brian O'Connor just made himself the biggest target in the world. And when you're that big a target, you make mistakes, you reach out to family, you slip up. Hobbs's eyes were hard, and when he does, I'll be there. And if I get to him first, then you better ask yourself, is he running from something, or is he running towards something? Hobbs opened the door. "Either way, Toretto, I'm going to find him." Question is whether it's to arrest him, or to figure out what the hell he's really doing. The door closed. Dom sat alone with Brian's badge and 1,000 questions burning in his chest. On the table, forgotten in Hobbs's file, was one more photo. Brian at Sao Paulo International Airport, 12 hours ago. The timestamp read 4:47 a.m. Brian was looking down, face obscured by a baseball cap and thick glasses. Classic low-tech evasion. No fancy disguises, just understanding how facial recognition systems worked and staying out of their optimal capture angles. But Dom could still see his brother's jaw. The tension there. The weight of what he was carrying. This wasn't the face of a man celebrating freedom. This was the face of a man walking toward his own execution. Berlin smelled like rain and history. Brian O'Connor stood in the doorway of an abandoned Stasi safe house in Lichtenberg, watching water stream down windows that hadn't been cleaned since the Cold War ended. The building had been a surveillance hub during East Germany's collapse, a place where secrets were kept, and people disappeared into bureaucratic black holes. Now it was his. The room was bare except for equipment Brian had assembled over 3 sleepless days. 7 laptops running on isolated networks, satellite uplink disguised as an old television antenna, power supply routed through 3 different buildings to avoid detection patterns, and enough encrypted hard drives to store the entire federal database twice over. This was his fortress, his operations center, his grave. The news cycle had turned him into a monster with the efficiency of a propaganda machine. CNN ran his confession on loop between pharmaceutical commercials. Fox News brought in experts to analyze his body language, pointing out micro-expressions that supposedly proved sociopathic tendencies. MSNBC debated whether he represented the failure of federal vetting procedures. International networks picked up the story. BBC, Al Jazeera, Deutsche Welle, all asking the same question with different accents. How does a decorated FBI agent become an international terrorist? Brian didn't watch. Couldn't stomach seeing his own face next to labels like Most Wanted and Extremely Dangerous and Armed Federal Fugitive. The narrative had taken root in the public consciousness like a virus. Soon it would be indistinguishable from truth. Good. He opened his laptop and tunneled through 17 proxy servers into Interpol's central database. The red notice was there, freshly published, his photo displayed alongside murderers and war criminals. Priority level, Alpha. Approach with extreme caution. Do not engage without tactical support. $20 million reward. Brian pulled up the financial blockchain, tracing the money flow with the precision of a forensic accountant. The reward was funded through a black budget account that didn't officially exist, same account that had authorized the Toretto crew's liquidation. Someone really wanted him dead, or really wanted everyone thinking he was the threat. His second laptop was tracking federal communications in real time. DSS, FBI, CIA, NSA. Every agency was mobilizing, but their search patterns were scattered, uncoordinated. They were looking for a terrorist mastermind, expecting sophisticated evasion techniques and high-tech countermeasures. Brian was giving them exactly that, but in reverse. He'd planted false digital signatures across a dozen countries over the past 72 hours. A credit card transaction in Prague using a fake card for a real purchase before destroying the card immediately. A passport scan at Istanbul's airport with a morphed photo and real passport number that would dead end at a discarded identity. A social media post geotagged in Cairo routed through 8 different VPN nodes across 4 continents. Each false trail required resources to investigate. Each investigation pulled agents away from the real target, his family. Brian's third laptop displayed live surveillance feeds he'd hijacked from Rio's security infrastructure. The safe house had been raided 6 hours ago. He'd watched through hacked cameras as Hobbs's team detained Dom, Mia, Roman, Tej. Watched them get separated into different vehicles, interrogated in different locations, and watched them get released. No charges, no restrictions. Just walked out like nothing had happened. That was the confirmation Brian needed. His plan was working. The confession had framed him as the sole perpetrator. The database purge had erased the crew from federal targeting systems. The investigation was focused entirely on Brian O'Connor, rogue agent, terrorist mastermind, enemy of the state. His family was safe. The cost was everything Brian had left. He pulled up the next phase of his operation. The Shadow Cabal. The real enemy. The people who'd authorized the liquidation order and thought they could murder innocent civilians without consequence because they operated above oversight, finding them wouldn't be easy. They operated through shell corporations and black budget accounts, their names scrubbed from official records, their decisions laundered through bureaucratic language that made murders sound like policy recommendations. But Brian had spent years infiltrating criminal organizations. He knew how power worked at the street level and the executive level. He knew the difference between visible authority and actual control. And he knew that money always left a trail, you just had to know where to look and how to read the patterns. His fourth laptop ran financial forensic software, parsing through offshore banking records he'd illegally accessed using federal backdoors he'd memorized during Quantico training. Shell companies in the Cayman Islands, holding corporations in Luxembourg, trust funds in Switzerland layered like matryoshka dolls. All connected, all flowing toward the same source like tributaries feeding a river. A name materialized from the data, Nightshade Holdings. Brian cross-referenced it against CIA operational code names. Nothing. NSA surveillance target databases. Nothing. FBI watch lists going back 30 years. Nothing. Which meant Nightshade wasn't just classified, it was invisible by design. He dug deeper, following money transfers back through 5 years of transactions, watching patterns emerge. Nightshade funded black ops operations that never made it to congressional oversight committees, regime changes in South America disguised as grassroots movements, weapons shipments to unstable regions through third-party brokers, assassination orders disguised as preventative counterterrorism measures. The Rio liquidation order wasn't personal. It was business. The Toretto crew had embarrassed corrupt officials, destabilized a financial system the cabal controlled, and worst of all, they'd inspired copycats. Underground racing crews in 12 countries were planning similar operations according to chatter Brian had intercepted. The symbol was more dangerous than the crime itself, so Nightshade had decided to eliminate the symbol. Brian's hands moved across the keyboard with surgical precision. If Nightshade wanted a war, he'd give them one, but not the war they expected. He activated a program he'd written years ago during his cyber forensics days, a digital parasite designed to infiltrate financial networks and siphon small amounts from massive transactions. 0.01%, invisible to auditors, untraceable to source. The kind of code that lived in the margins of legitimate transfers. Over 6 hours, the parasite bled $50 million from Nightshade's own black budget accounts. Brian routed the money through a Hawala network. No banks, no digital records. Just trust-based value transfers through underground brokers who'd been moving money this way for centuries. The funds moved from Berlin to Tokyo to Rio to Los Angeles, fragmenting with each transfer until tracing the origin became mathematically impossible. Then he used it to fund something Nightshade would never see coming, a private surveillance network, targeting them. Brian hired freelance hackers through encrypted channels, paying premium rates for plausible deniability and professional silence. He bought satellite time under fake corporations with boards of directors who didn't exist. He planted listening devices in offices, homes, cars belonging to Nightshade-connected officials, using courier services that would evaporate after delivery. Within 48 hours, Brian knew more about the people hunting him than they knew about themselves. Their names, their families, their routines. Their secrets, their mistresses and offshore accounts and tax evasion schemes, and their weaknesses. The question now was how to use that information without getting his family killed in the crossfire. His phone buzzed, not one of the burners, those were for operational security and got destroyed every 12 hours. This was different, a frequency he'd set up years ago during his undercover days. Emergency contact, Family only. Dom's number. Brian stared at the screen. Every tactical instinct screamed not to answer. Contact meant risk. Risk meant exposure. Exposure meant death. But it was Dom. He answered without speaking. Silence on the other end. Then Dom's voice, rough and tired. I don't know if you can hear this. I don't know if you're even alive. But I found your badge, Brian. And I know you. I know you don't abandon family. So whatever this is, whatever you're doing, you better have a damn good reason. Brian's throat tightened. They released us, Dom continued. No charges. Like you knew they would. Like you planned it. A pause. I'm not stupid, brother. I can read between the lines. But Mia's asking questions I can't answer. And I need to know, are you coming back? Brian wanted to say yes, wanted to explain everything. The liquidation order, Nightshade, the sacrifice he'd made to keep them all breathing. Wanted to tell Dom that every choice he'd made was calculated to maximize their survival. But words were weapons. And this line was probably compromised by now. Instead, Brian did something he knew Dom would understand. He sent a single GPS coordinate through encrypted SMS, then destroyed the phone with a hammer, pulverizing the circuit board into dust. The coordinate pointed to a location in the Canary Islands, an empty beach, midnight, 3 days from now. Dom would know what it meant. I'm alive, I'm fighting, and I need you to trust me. Whether Dom would show up was another question. Brian turned back to his screens. The hunt was accelerating. Hobbs had assembled a task force according to intercepted communications. 12 agents, unlimited resources, singular focus. They were good, experienced, relentless. But Brian had been hunting people for a decade before Hobbs learned to shave. He pulled up airline manifests, cross-referencing Hobbs's known associates with recent international flights. Found the pattern within 20 minutes. 6 agents en route to Berlin. ETA 18 hours. They'd traced something. Probably the fake credit card transaction Brian had planted in Prague. Good tradecraft on their part. Following the breadcrumbs with professional precision. Time to give them something real to chase. Brian activated a second laptop and began crafting his next false trail. This one would lead to Rotterdam, a port city with enough criminal infrastructure that a fugitive could plausibly disappear for months in the underground economy. He booked a cargo ship passage under a fake identity, paid cash through a hawala broker who'd never remember his face, left just enough digital signature that a skilled investigator would find it after enough work. Then he planted evidence that would make Hobbs's team believe Brian was planning a major operation from Rotterdam. Fake weapon purchases through dark web markets, encrypted communications with non-existent terror cells. A narrative so compelling that Hobbs would have no choice but to deploy everything he had to that single location. While they were in Rotterdam, Brian would be somewhere else entirely, somewhere they'd never think to look. Tokyo. Han had sent a message through the underground racing network 3 days ago. Safe harbor available. No questions asked. It was time to accept. Brian began packing his equipment. 7 laptops, 3 false passports, each with complete background documentation. Enough cash to disappear for a year. And one item he couldn't explain rationally. A photo of Mia from their wedding that never happened. The one they'd planned before Brian's undercover work had burned that dream to ash. He looked at the photo. Her smile. The way she'd looked at him like he was something more than a liar wearing a badge. I'm sorry, Brian whispered to the empty room, but this is the only way I know how to keep you safe. He encrypted one final message, not to Dom, not to Hobbs, to someone who would understand the game he was playing because she played it better than anyone. Cipher. The message was simple. I know you're watching, and I know what you want. If you come near my family, I'll burn your entire network to the ground. He attached evidence to prove it wasn't a bluff. Server locations for Cipher's surveillance network, names of her operatives embedded in intelligence agencies, financial accounts she thought were hidden behind layers of encryption. Brian had spent 3 days hacking her infrastructure. Not to destroy it, that would be declaring open war, but to show her he could if he chose. Mutually assured destruction, the Cold War's favorite tactic, still effective decades later. The message sent through channels so encrypted even NSA quantum computers would need years to crack them. Then Brian walked out of the Stasi safe house and disappeared into Berlin's rain-soaked streets. Behind him, the building would burn. Thermite charges on a timer. Within an hour, every piece of evidence would be ash and melted metal. Brian O'Connor was a ghost, and ghosts didn't leave traces. But as he boarded a cargo ship bound for Tokyo, paying cash, using a passport that identified him as a Norwegian mechanic named Erik Johansson, Brian allowed himself one moment of weakness. He checked his encrypted email one final time. One new message. Untraceable source, routed through servers in 14 different countries. It contained a single sentence. Well played, O'Connor. But the game's just starting. Cipher. Brian deleted the message and threw the phone into the North Sea, watching it sink into black water. The game was indeed starting, and Brian was playing for keeps. Luke Hobbs stood in the Rotterdam shipyard at 3 a.m., rain hammering his tactical jacket like bullets, staring at a shipping container that should have been Brian O'Connor's next move. Empty. Not even empty. Wiped. The interior smelled like industrial cleaner in desperation. No fingerprints. No DNA. No trace that anyone had ever been here except the faint chemical residue of someone who knew exactly how to erase their existence. Son of a bitch, Hobbs muttered. Behind him, his team was conducting a grid search that would turn up exactly nothing because Brian O'Connor had probably never set foot in Rotterdam. This was a ghost chase. A carefully constructed waste of resources designed to pull Hobbs and his team away from wherever Brian actually was. And Hobbs had fallen for it like a rookie. Agent Riley stepped beside him, tablet glowing in the darkness. Sir, the financial trail was perfect. Cash transactions traced through 3 Hawala brokers, all confirming transfer to Rotterdam. The cargo ship manifests show a passenger matching O'Connor's description. Even the local street cameras caught someone fitting his profile entering this warehouse. All fake, Hobbs said flatly. How can you be sure? Because it's too perfect. Hobbs had hunted fugitives for 15 years. He knew the difference between lucky breaks and manufactured evidence. Real fugitives made mistakes, left traces, got sloppy when they were tired or scared. O'Connor's a trained federal agent. He knows our playbook better than we do. He knows we'd trace the Hawala network. He wanted us to find this. Then where is he? That was the $20 million question. Hobbs pulled up the tactical map on his phone, studying the global surveillance network they deployed, 22 countries, 37 airports, 56 border crossings, every single one equipped with biometric scanners programmed to flag Brian O'Connor's face. Nothing. Not a single hit in 7 days. Either Brian had access to surgical-grade facial reconstruction, which was technically possible but required months of recovery, or he was using low-tech evasion methods that predated modern surveillance. Baseball caps, glasses, staying out of camera angles. The kind of tradecraft that required understanding how the systems worked rather than trying to beat them with technology. Hobbs's phone buzzed. Secure line. Director-level priority. Hobbs, he answered. Status. The voice was clipped. Efficient. Deputy Director Clarkson, a bureaucrat who'd never made an arrest but loved giving orders to people who had. We're tracking multiple leads in Rotterdam. Cut the bullshit. O'Connor played you. I've got 8 other agencies running the same wild goose chase across Europe. Meanwhile, he's disappeared so completely we're starting to wonder if he's still alive. He's alive. Hobbs was certain of that. Dead men didn't leave evidence trails this sophisticated. Then where? Hobbs couldn't answer. I'm pulling half your team, Clarkson continued, reassigning them to different priorities. You've got 48 hours to produce results or I'm shutting down the task force entirely. Hobbs stood in the rain, watching his team dismantle a crime scene that had never been a crime scene. 7 days ago, Brian O'Connor had been his target. Now he was starting to feel like they were Brian's. Sir? Riley's voice pulled him back. We found something. She led him to a corner of the warehouse, where a maintenance panel had been removed. Behind it, a small digital device wired into the building's electrical system. Data logger, Riley explained. Records timestamps of when the building's power consumption spikes. Basically, a very crude motion sensor. Hobbs examined it. Professional-grade equipment. Military surplus. The kind of thing that cost serious money and required technical knowledge to install. When was it installed? 48 hours before we arrived. Riley pulled up the data on her tablet. And here's the interesting part. It recorded exactly one entry into this warehouse. Lasted 6 minutes. Then, nothing. 6 minutes to plant evidence and set a trap. Hobbs couldn't help but admire the efficiency despite himself. What else? Riley hesitated. There was a file transfer. Small. Encrypted. Uploaded to a satellite network we can't trace. Uploaded when? The moment our team entered the warehouse. Brian had been watching. In real time. Probably through hacked security cameras positioned around the perimeter. He'd seen Hobbs and his team arrive, watched them search the empty warehouse, and then sent them a message. Hobbs's phone buzzed again. Different number. Untraceable burner. A single photo downloaded. It showed Hobbs himself standing in this exact spot from an angle that suggested the camera was hidden somewhere in the warehouse rafters. The timestamp read 3:47 a.m. Today. Accompanying text. You're better than this, Hobbs. Stop chasing shadows and start asking why I ran. Hobbs's jaw clenched. Riley looked over his shoulder. Is that O'Connor? Hobbs stared at the photo, the angle, the clarity, the message. He's telling us he's watching. From where? Hobbs scanned the warehouse ceiling. Dozens of places to hide a camera, hundreds of sightlines, but finding it was pointless. Brian had probably already remotely wiped the device, leaving nothing but empty hardware. The real question was, why send this message? Brian could have stayed silent, let Hobbs waste resources on false trails across Europe, but instead he was engaging, taunting, yes, but also communicating. Stop chasing shadows and start asking why I ran. Hobbs pulled out the file he'd been carrying since Rio. Brian's federal record, or what was left of it, the redactions, the missing years, the sections marked classified above Hobbs's security clearance. Riley, Hobbs said slowly, pull everything you can find on Operation Nightfall. Sir, that operation is... I know what it is. Pull it anyway. While Riley worked, Hobbs studied the photo again. Brian's message wasn't just a taunt. It was a clue. Ask why I ran, not how, not where. Why? Hobbs had assumed Brian was running from justice, from consequences of his crimes. But what if he was running from something else? What if the confession video was a lie? Not just a lie, a strategic deception designed to protect someone, or hide something bigger than one rogue agent. Hobbs thought back to Rio, the crew's arrest, the interrogation, Dom's face when Hobbs showed him the surveillance photos. Dom had been angry, betrayed, hurt, but not surprised, like he'd been expecting it. Sir, Riley's voice was tight. Operation Nightfall doesn't exist. What? I pulled federal databases going back 20 years. No operation by that name, no authorization codes, no budget allocations. It's a ghost. But Brian had referenced it in his confession, specifically named it as the operation he'd been running, which meant either Brian had fabricated the operation or someone had erased it from the record. Hobbs's phone buzzed. Third message from Brian, this one was longer, a document, encrypted financial records, offshore accounts, money trails leading through the Cayman Islands, Luxembourg, Switzerland like a map of global corruption, all connected to a single entity, Nightshade Holdings. And a note, this is what you're not allowed to find. This is why I'm the target instead of the problem. Hobbs opened the files. Took him 6 seconds to realize what he was looking at. Black budget accounts funding unauthorized operations. Regime changes in South America disguised as counterterrorism. Weapons deals with unstable actors. Political assassinations dressed up as preventative measures. All approved through channels that bypassed congressional oversight entirely, and all connected to the Rio operation. The final document was a classified order dated 3 days before Brian's confession. Operation Nightfall. Target, Toretto crew. Status, code red, liquidation authorized execution window, 48 hours. Hobbs's blood went cold. Riley, he said quietly, we need to talk to... I don't care about jurisdiction. Get me Dom Toretto, now. The meeting happened in a place neither man would have chosen. A beachside bar in the Dominican Republic, neutral territory away from surveillance and prying eyes. Dom sat across from Hobbs at a corner table, beer untouched, eyes hard. "You got 30 seconds before I walk," Dom said. Hobbs slid a tablet across the table. "Brian sent me this." Dom looked at the screen. The liquidation order, the financial records, the evidence that Nightshade Holdings had authorized his entire crew's execution like they were ordering office supplies. "They were going to kill you," Hobbs said. "All of you. Brian found out and made himself the target instead." Dom's hands clenched around the tablet. "How long have you known?" 7 days. But I couldn't confirm it until now." Hobbs leaned forward. "I've spent 15 years following orders. Good orders? Bad orders. Orders I didn't understand but followed anyway, because that's what the job required. But this?" He gestured at the tablet. "This is murder dressed up as policy, and Brian O'Connor is the only one with the balls to expose it." "Then why are you still hunting him?" "Because I've got a job to do." "But the job just changed." Hobbs pulled out another file. "These are the people behind Nightshade. 12 names. All connected to federal agencies, multinational corporations, defense contractors. They operate in shadows and thought they were untouchable. And now? Now Brian's proving them wrong. Every time he evades capture, every time he plants evidence, every time he humiliates federal task forces, he's showing the world their system isn't invincible." Hobbs paused. "He's not just running. He's fighting." Dom looked up from the tablet. "You're saying he's not a terrorist. I'm saying he's the opposite. He's exposing the real terrorists, the ones who wear suits and sign death warrants from air-conditioned offices." Hobbs stood. "This is your fight as much as it is Brian's, maybe more." For a long moment, neither man spoke. The ocean crashed against the beach. Music drifted from inside the bar. Normal life happening around men who'd chosen anything but normal. "What do you need from me?" Dom finally asked. "Nothing. This is information, not a recruitment pitch." Hobbs turned to leave, then stopped. "But when you find him, and you will find him before I do, tell him something for me." "What?" "Tell him the hunter's starting to root for the fox." Hobbs walked away, leaving Dom with the tablet and 1,000 questions. Dom opened a new file on the device. Hidden beneath the Nightshade documents was a single encrypted message. "Dom, by now Hobbs has shown you the truth. The liquidation order. Nightshade. The reason I became the monster. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for time. There are 12 people who authorized your execution. I'm going to dismantle their empire piece by piece, but I can't do it if I'm dead. Stay hidden. Stay safe. And when this is over, we'll have that beer on the beach you keep talking about." Dom closed the tablet, looked out at the ocean, and started planning. The message arrived at 3:47 a.m. through channels that shouldn't have existed. Brian O'Connor was in Tokyo, hiding in a garage beneath a ramen shop in Shibuya, surrounded by half-disassembled drift cars and the smell of motor oil that had soaked into the concrete over decades. He'd been in Japan for 8 days, working as a gaijin mechanic for Han's racing network, anonymous, invisible, exactly where he needed to be. Then his encrypted laptop chimed with an alert that made his blood freeze. Someone had accessed his secondary surveillance network. Not hacked. Accessed, with proper authentication codes only Brian should have possessed. The screen displayed a single line of text. "I know where Dom Toretto is, and I know you care." Then a photo loaded. Dom, standing on a beach in the Canary Islands, the same coordinates Brian had sent him 2 weeks ago. Except Brian had never gone to that meeting. It had been a test, to see if Dom would show up, to confirm his brother still trusted him despite everything. Dom had shown up. And someone had been watching. The cursor blinked. Then new text appeared, self-typing like a conversation with a ghost. "Hello, Brian. My name is Cipher, and we need to talk." Brian's hands hovered over the keyboard. Every instinct screamed to shut down the laptop, destroy the hard drive, burn the garage to the ground, and disappear into Tokyo's underground before whoever this was could triangulate his location. But curiosity was a weapon, and Brian had always been too good with weapons. He typed, "How did you access my network?" "The same way you accessed mine. Skill, patience, and a very expensive quantum decryption system. What do you want?" "To offer you a job." Brian almost laughed. He was the most wanted man on the planet. hunted by every intelligence agency in the Western Hemisphere, and someone was recruiting him like this was a LinkedIn message. Not interested. You should be, because the people hunting you, Nightshade Holdings, the Shadow Cabal, the bureaucrats who signed Dom's death warrant, they're also my enemies. That got his attention. Why? Because they're old power, corrupt, inefficient. They operate through violence and intimidation, leaving trails anyone with my resources can follow. I prefer elegance. A new file downloaded automatically. Satellite footage of a NATO facility in Brussels. High security. Armed guards. Biometric scanners. The kind of place that didn't exist on official maps. Inside that building is a server containing classified defense contracts, weapons deals, technology sales, enough information to destabilize 3 governments and expose 2 decades of illegal arms trafficking. And you want me to steal it. I want you to retrieve it. There's a difference. Stealing implies they know it's gone. I want you to copy the data without leaving a trace, then deliver it to me in exchange for what? The cursor blinked for 3 seconds. Then, in exchange, I'll keep Dom Toretto's location off every surveillance network on the planet. I'll scrub his biometric data from facial recognition systems. I'll make sure no one-not Hobbs, not Nightshade, not even the NSA, can find him. For how long? As long as you keep working for me. There it was. The trap, the leverage, the way Cipher operated, not through force, but through perfectly constructed incentives that made refusal impossible. Brian stared at Dom's photo. His brother on that beach, waiting for a meeting that never happened, trusting Brian enough to show up despite everything. How do I know you'll keep your word? You don't. But consider, I've already located Dominic. I could sell that information to Nightshade for millions. Instead, I'm offering you a trade. That should tell you something. It told Brian that Cipher was playing a longer game, one where Brian was more valuable as an asset than Dom was as a target. 72 hours, Cipher's message continued. That's how long you have to complete the Brussels operation. After that, I leaked Dom's coordinates to every agency hunting you, starting with Hobbs. And if I refuse outright, then I leak them immediately. And you can spend the rest of your very short life explaining to Dom why you let him die to maintain your principles. Brian's jaw clenched. The NATO facility would be heavily guarded. Infiltrating it without leaving evidence would require precision he wasn't sure he still had after weeks of running. The margin for error was 0. But the alternative was watching his brother die. I'll need equipment, Brian typed. Already arranged. There's a storage unit in Antwerp, Unit 247. Combination is your badge number backwards. Of course, she knew his badge number. One condition, Brian added. After Brussels, we're done. One job. That's all. We'll see. The connection severed. Brian sat in the darkness of the garage, surrounded by cars that represented freedom, speed, escape, the open road. Han's world. A world Brian couldn't fully enter because he was carrying too much weight from the world he'd left behind. His phone buzzed. Han emerging from the back office with 2 beers. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Han said in his usual understated way, sliding 1 beer across the workbench. Something like that. Brian took the beer but didn't drink. "I need to leave Tokyo for a few days." Han studied him with those calculating eyes that missed nothing. "Belgium? How did you? You've been researching NATO facilities for the past 6 hours. Your search history isn't as encrypted as you think." Han sipped his beer. "Cipher? You know about Cipher. Know of her. She's been building a surveillance network for years, buying intelligence from people like me who operate in gray zones." Han's expression was neutral, but his eyes were sharp. "You don't want to work for her, Brian. She collects people the way some collect cars, and she never lets them go." "I don't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. The question is whether you're willing to accept the consequences." Brian thought about Dom on that beach, Mia in hiding somewhere, his family scattered across the world because he'd made himself the target. "No consequences," Brian said quietly. "Just different problems." Han set down his beer. "I can get you into Belgium. Got some people who owe me favors, but after that, you're on your own." "I've been on my own since Rio." "No," Han corrected. "You've been running on borrowed time. There's a difference. 72 hours later, Brian stood outside the NATO facility in Brussels, rain hammering the street in sheets that made surveillance cameras nearly useless. He'd spent 2 days studying the facility's security protocols through hacked blueprints and satellite imagery. Biometric scanners at every entrance, armed guards rotating every 6 hours, interior surveillance cameras with military-grade encryption, and a digital air gap. The server he needed to access wasn't connected to any external network, making remote hacking impossible. He'd have to go inside. The equipment Cipher had provided was impressive. Morphed passport that would fool biometric scanners, RFID cloner to bypass keycard locks, electromagnetic pulse device small enough to fit in a cigarette pack, and a data extraction drive that could clone an entire server in under 90 seconds. Also included, a cyanide capsule. Brian stared at the capsule now, tucked in a hidden pocket of his jacket. Standard intelligence protocol for Black Ops work. If captured, don't talk. Ever. He pocketed it and moved. The facility's main entrance was impossible. Too many cameras, too many guards, too many ways to get caught. But every building had weaknesses. Brian had identified this one during his reconnaissance, a maintenance entrance in the underground parking garage, used by cleaning crews who came through at 11 p.m. every night. Brian waited in the shadows, watching the crew arrive. 4 people, all carrying standard janitorial equipment, all scanning ID cards that would grant them Level 2 access. Level 2 wasn't enough. Brian needed Level 4. But Level 2 could get him inside. He fell in behind the cleaning crew, moving with the practiced invisibility of someone who knew how to exploit human nature. People saw what they expected to see. A man in maintenance coveralls carrying cleaning supplies was invisible. The crew scanned their cards. Brian waited 3 seconds, then scanned his cloned RFID card. The door unlocked. Inside, the facility was sterile. Concrete corridors lit by fluorescent lights that hummed overhead. Security cameras every 20 meters. Guards stationed at key intersections. Brian moved like water, flowing through blind spots he'd mapped during his digital reconnaissance. The cameras operated on predictable rotation patterns. The guards followed protocols that prioritized choke points over empty hallways. The server room was on sub-level 3, behind a retinal scanner that would have stopped anyone without Level 4 access. Brian pulled out the electromagnetic pulse device and placed it against the scanner's housing. 3 seconds. The scanner screen flickered, then displayed an error message. Manual override activated. The door unlocked. Brian slipped inside. The server room was massive, rows of black towers humming with processing power, cooling systems maintaining precise temperature, backup generators ready to kick in if primary power failed. And at the center, the air-gapped server containing classified defense contracts. Brian connected his data extraction drive and started the clone process. 90 seconds. That's all he needed. The progress bar crept forward. 10%. 20%. Somewhere above, an alarm began to wail. Brian's heart rate didn't spike. Years of fieldwork had taught him to control physiological responses to stress, but his mind raced through contingencies. The alarm wasn't for him. Couldn't be. He triggered no sensors, tripped no alerts. Unless the door burst open. Not guards. Something worse. A woman. Mid-30s. Tactical gear. Eyes that recognized Brian immediately. "Hello, Brian," she said with a smile that didn't reach those eyes. "Cipher sends her regards." Brian's hand moved toward his weapon, but the woman was faster. Taser. 2 prongs hit his chest. 50,000 volts. Brian dropped. Consciousness fragmented. Pain, electricity, the smell of burnt cloth. When his vision cleared, he was zip-tied to a chair. The woman stood over him, examining the data extraction drive still connected to the server. "Impressive work," she said. "Most people trigger at least one alarm. You got all the way to the server before I stopped you." She pulled the drive free. "Cipher will be pleased. Who are you?" Brian's voice was rough. "Someone who understands what Cipher really wants." She crouched to eye level. "She told you this was about NATO contracts, didn't she? Defense deals and weapon sales?" Brian said nothing. "It's not. Those contracts are real, but they're not the target. This is." She held up the drive. Embedded in the defense contract files is a Trojan. Once Cipher activates it, she'll have access to NATO's entire surveillance network. Every satellite, every drone, every listening post from Berlin to Tokyo. Brian's blood went cold. You just gave her the keys to the kingdom, the woman continued, and she's going to use them to watch the entire world burn. I'm not, the woman smiled. I'm stopping her. She destroyed the drive, crushed it under her boot until it was just plastic shards and silicon dust. You just cost me Dom's life, Brian said quietly. No, I just saved it. She pulled out her phone and showed Brian a photo. Dom, still on that beach in the Canary Islands, but the timestamp was 15 minutes old. Cipher doesn't have real-time satellite access. Not yet. She's been bluffing, using old surveillance photos and manipulation to make you think she's all seeing. How do I know you're not lying? You don't. But consider, if Cipher really had Dom's location, why would she need you to retrieve this data? She'd just hand him over to Nightshade and be done with it. The woman cut Brian's zip ties. She needs you because you're good. And she needs this data because it's the last piece of her surveillance empire. Brian stood, rubbing his wrists. Who are you? Someone who's been watching Cipher build her network for 3 years. Someone who's tired of powerful people playing God. She handed Brian a burner phone. There's a car outside. Keys in the ignition. Get out of Brussels before Cipher realizes what happened. And the data? I'm uploading a virus to the server. It'll corrupt the files Cipher wanted, but preserve the legitimate defense contracts for NATO. They'll think it's a malfunction. No one will know you were here. Brian moved toward the door, then stopped. Why help me? Because I read your confession video, the real one, not the version the media broadcast. She smiled slightly. You made yourself the monster to save your family. That's not terrorism. That's sacrifice. What's your name? Doesn't matter. I'm dead in 6 hours anyway, she said it matter-of-factly, like discussing the weather. Cipher doesn't tolerate betrayal. Once she realizes I sabotaged this operation, she'll send people. I knew that before I walked in here. Then why? Because some things are worth dying for, and stopping Cipher is one of them. She gestured to the door. Go, before I change my mind. Brian left. The car was waiting exactly as promised. He drove through Brussels' rain-soaked streets, mind-racing. Cipher had manipulated him, used his love for Dom as leverage, almost succeeded in giving her total global surveillance, and someone had just died to stop it. Brian's phone buzzed. Not the burner the woman had given him, his encrypted phone. A message from Cipher. I know what happened in Brussels. I know you failed, and I know that woman helped you. Unfortunate. She had such potential. Then a video. The woman from the server room, tied to a chair in a dark room. Cipher's voice off camera. Betrayal has consequences. A gunshot. The video ended. Brian pulled over, hands shaking with rage he couldn't express. Another message. You owe me a job, Brian, and I always collect debts. Next time, there won't be anyone to save you. Brian threw the phone out the window, watching it shatter against wet pavement. He'd escaped Cipher's trap, but the cost was another life on his conscience. And Cipher was right about one thing. She always collected debts. This wasn't over. Not even close. Los Angeles smelled like exhaust and broken dreams. Dom Toretto stood in his garage, the one place in the world that had always made sense, staring at an empty chair where Brian used to sit, beer in hand, talking about nothing and everything until sunrise painted the sky orange. The chair was still there. The beer cans from their last conversation were still in the recycling bin. But Brian was gone, scattered across the world like ashes, hunted by everyone and trusted by no one, except Dom, because Dom had read the files Hobbs showed him, understood the sacrifice, saw the pattern Brian had been weaving since the moment he'd walked away from Rio with nothing but a plan to save them all. But understanding didn't fill the empty chair. Mia moved through the garage like a ghost, organizing parts that didn't need organizing, cleaning tools that were already clean. She hadn't spoken Brian's name in 2 weeks. Every time Dom tried, she'd leave the room with eyes that said everything words couldn't. Grief took different forms. Dom's was rage, focused, controlled, aimed at Nightshade Holdings and every corrupt official who'd signed a death warrant for his family. Mia's was silence. The garage door rattled, not the main entrance. The side door the one only family used. Dom's hand moved to his weapon, muscle memory from too many years living in shadows. But the figure that stepped through wasn't a threat. Tej, carrying a laptop and wearing an expression that meant he'd found something. "You're gonna want to see this," Tej said without preamble. He set the laptop on the workbench, pulling up satellite footage. A cargo ship docked in Tokyo, grainy surveillance image of someone who might be Brian, working on a car in what looked like an underground garage. "How sure are you?" Dom asked. 70%. The facial recognition is garbage quality, but the body language, the way he moves around cars. Tej zoomed in. "That's Brian. Tokyo, Han's territory. Of course Brian would go to Han. The one member of the crew who understood what it meant to disappear and start over. The one person who'd never ask questions Brian couldn't answer. Can you track him?" Dom's voice was steady, but his heart was hammering. "Already tried. Whatever network he's using is military-grade encrypted. I can't even get a ping without triggering alarms that would alert every intelligence agency on the planet." Tej paused. "But I found something else." A new window opened. Shipping manifests. A delivery truck leaving Los Angeles 3 days ago, destination marked as private residence classified. "Someone ordered a delivery to your garage," Tej explained. "But it was routed through 12 different logistics companies to hide the origin. Took me 48 hours to trace it backwards. As to where? Berlin. 6 days ago, before Brian left for Tokyo." Tej pulled up GPS coordinates. The delivery should arrive in approximately, he checked his watch, 3 minutes. As if on cue, a truck rumbled outside. Dom stepped into the late afternoon sun, Tej following. The delivery truck was unmarked, driver wearing sunglasses and a cap pulled low. Professional? Anonymous. "Dominic Toretto?" the driver asked, though it wasn't really a question. "Yeah. Sign here." Dom scrawled a signature. The driver unloaded a single crate, 6 feet long, 4 feet wide, reinforced steel construction. Then he left without another word, tires kicking up dust as the truck disappeared down the street. Dom and Tej stared at the crate. "You gonna open it?" Tej asked. Dom found a crowbar, pried the lid open. Inside, wrapped in protective foam and gleaming under California sun, was a car. Not just any car, a 1970 Dodge Charger RT. Black paint so deep it looked like liquid midnight. Chrome accents that caught light like knives. Interior restored to factory perfection. Dom's breath caught. This was his car. The car he'd been building in the garage for years, piece by piece, a project he'd started with his father and never finished. The car he'd abandoned when they'd scattered after Rio, too focused on survival to care about anything else. Someone had finished it. Dom walked around the Charger, hands trembling as he touched the hood. The bodywork was perfect. The engine, he could hear it even without turning the key, was a masterpiece. Whoever had built this knew cars the way Dom knew family. There was only one person who fit that description. Dom opened the driver's door. The interior smelled like leather and new rubber. On the dashboard, a small envelope. Inside, a key and a note written in Brian's precise handwriting. "Dom, I know I can't be there, but this can. Finish what you started. Take care of Mia. And when you drive this, remember, family is forever, even when we're apart." B. Dom sat in the driver's seat, the one his father had sat in decades ago, the one he'd imagined sitting in when the build was finally complete. The leather conformed to him perfectly, like the car had been waiting. He turned the key. The engine roared to life, not loud, but powerful, the kind of controlled fury that came from hundreds of hours of tuning. Every piston fired in perfect sequence, every valve opened and closed with mechanical precision. This wasn't just a car, it was an apology, a promise, a statement that said, "I'm still your brother, even if I can't be there to say it." Dom's hand found the center console, feeling for any hidden compartments. Found one. A small digital device, no bigger than a matchbox, magnetically attached beneath the dashboard. He pulled it out, examining it in the sunlight. GPS tracker, but not a standard tracker. This was military grade, the kind used by intelligence agencies for high-value asset protection. Tej leaned in through the window. "That's a threat detection system. Scans for surveillance equipment within a 5-mile radius. If any federal vehicle or drone gets close, it'll ping your phone with coordinates and recommended evasion routes. He built you a fortress on wheels. Tej tapped the device. This tech is classified NSA level. Brian must have stolen it from federal databases before he went ghost. Dom stared at the tracker, then at the charger, then at the empty garage behind him. Brian wasn't just protecting them from a distance. He was still fighting. Still the brother Dom had trusted with his life in 1,000 different ways across a dozen different operations. Mia appeared in the garage doorway, drawn by the sound of the engine. She froze when she saw the charger. "Is that—" Her voice broke. "Yeah." Dom stepped out, letting her approach. Brian finished it. Mia's hand touched the hood the same way Dom's had, like she was afraid it might disappear if she applied too much pressure. Her eyes were wet. "He's not a traitor," she said. "Not a question. A statement. Never was. Then where is he?" Dom looked at Tej. Tej pulled up the Tokyo satellite footage again, showing Mia the grainy image of Brian working in Han's garage. Mia studied the image, the way Brian stood, the way he moved, the way he looked over his shoulder, paranoid even in safe territory. "He looks tired," she said softly. "He's been running for a month." Dom closed the laptop, and he's not stopping until Nightshade is destroyed. "Can we help him?" Dom thought about that, thought about the badge Brian had left on his charger in Rio, thought about the confession video, thought about this car delivered across thousands of miles with a note that said everything and nothing. Brian had made himself the target to save them. Now it was their turn. "Tej," Dom said, voice hardening with decision, "I need you to do something that's probably illegal and definitely dangerous. My favorite kind of favor. Find Nightshade's executives, real names, real locations, real vulnerabilities." "What are you planning?" Dom looked at the charger, at Mia, at the empty chair in his garage. "I'm planning to give Brian backup he doesn't know he has." Dom's smile was cold. "And I'm planning to remind Nightshade why they were afraid of the Toretto crew in the first place." "Dom," Mia said carefully, "if we go after them, we become targets too. We were always targets. Brian just bought us time." Dom started the charger again, the engine rumbling like thunder. Now it's time to use it. He drove the car out of the garage, testing the acceleration, feeling the power respond instantly to his touch. The threat detection system lit up his phone within seconds. Federal surveillance van, 4.8 miles northeast. Tracking algorithm classified as high-priority fugitive monitoring. They were watching, still searching for Brian, still hoping the family would lead them to the ghost. Dom smiled. "Let's give them something to follow." He floored the accelerator. The charger leaped forward like a living thing, tires screaming against asphalt, engine howling with barely contained power. Within 10 seconds, Dom hit 80 miles per hour. Within 20, he was on the highway, weaving through traffic with precision that came from a lifetime of driving on the edge. The surveillance van tried to follow. Emphasis on tried. Dom led them through surface streets, industrial zones, warehouse districts, terrain he knew better than his own reflection. The van fell behind, GPS struggling to keep up with a car that turned corners at speeds no professional driver would attempt. 15 minutes later, Dom parked behind an abandoned factory, watching through his mirrors as the surveillance van finally gave up and turned back toward the city. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Yeah? Nice driving." Brian's voice. Encrypted. Distant. "But you just put yourself on Hobbs's radar." Dom's heart jumped. "Where are you?" "Doesn't matter. What matters is you need to stay hidden," says the guy who sent me a car with a federal tracking system. A pause. "Then, that system is to protect you, not chase me." "I know." Dom's voice softened. "Brian, I know what you did. Hobbs showed me the files. The liquidation order, Nightshade, all of it. Silence on the other end. Long enough that Dom thought the connection had died. Then, I'm sorry I couldn't tell you. I'm sorry you thought, don't." Dom cut him off. "You made yourself the enemy so we could be free. That's not something you apologize for. That's something you let your family help you finish. You can't help me, Dom. This is too big, too dangerous. Bullshit." We've done impossible before. Fast 5. Remember? Vault heist. Corrupt government. $100 million. We won because we worked together. This isn't a heist. This is war. Then let's go to war. Dom's voice turned to steel. You're not alone anymore, Brian. You hear me? You're not alone. The line was quiet. When Brian spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion he couldn't hide. I'm in Tokyo, Han's garage, Shibuya district. But Dom, if you come here, I'm coming. You'll become a target. Then we'll be targets together, like family. Dom ended the call before Brian could argue. Mia was standing outside the factory, having followed in her own car. She'd heard enough to understand. We're going to Tokyo? She asked. We're going to Tokyo. Good. Mia's eyes were hard. Because I've got some things to say to Brian O'Connor, and he's going to listen. Dom looked at the Charger, the car Brian had finished, the symbol of everything they'd lost and everything they were fighting to reclaim. Family wasn't a word, it was a promise, and the Toretto family always kept their promises. Tokyo at night was a symphony of neon in motion. Han Seoul-Oh stood on the roof of his garage watching the Shibuya Scramble crossing below. Thousands of people moving in choreographed chaos, every one of them anonymous, invisible, exactly the kind of crowd where a ghost could hide. Brian was downstairs, working on a 350Z suspension like the hounds of hell weren't sniffing every airport and border crossing for his scent. Ham had watched him for 2 weeks now, watched the way Brian moved through the garage with the careful precision of someone who knew one mistake meant death. The kid was good, better than good. Han had worked with professionals before, criminals, spies, mercenaries, and Brian operated at a level that suggested his FBI training had only scratched the surface of what he was capable of. But talent only got you so far. Eventually, everyone made a mistake. Han's phone buzzed. Encrypted message from one of his racing network contacts. Yakuza heat incoming. Kurosawa clan? Looking for American mechanic. Asking questions in Roppongi. Han sighed. Of course someone had noticed. Tokyo's underground was a closed ecosystem. A new gaijin mechanic showing up with skills that didn't match his cover story would draw attention eventually. He descended the stairs, finding Brian exactly where he'd left him, under the 350Z, torque wrench in hand, focused with the intensity of someone who used work to avoid thinking. We've got a problem, Han said. Brian slid out from under the car, grease smeared across his forearms. What kind? Yakuza kind. Someone's asking questions about you. Who sent them? That's the interesting part. The payment for information came through a shell corporation in Luxembourg. Same kind of shell corporation Cipher uses. Brian's face went cold. She found me. Probably never lost you. Han lit a cigarette, offering one to Brian. Brian declined. Cipher's got surveillance networks in 17 countries. You think hiding in Tokyo would stop her? I thought your connections, my connections, buy time. They don't buy invisibility. Han exhaled smoke. The Yakuza will be here within the hour. We can't fight them. Too many. Too organized. So we run. Where? Wangan Expressway. Lose them in the mountains. Han gestured to the garage, where a dozen cars sat in various states of modification. Pick your weapon. Each one built for one thing, speed. His hand landed on a Nissan Silvia S15, midnight blue with racing stripes that glowed faintly in the garage's fluorescent light. The car Han had been building for months, tuned for mountain drift courses. That one, Brian said. Good choice! Han grabbed keys to his own car, an RX-7 with a rotary engine that screamed like a banshee. One rule, don't crash. The Yakuza will be right behind us, and they don't take prisoners. They drove out just as the first black Lexus rolled into the alley. The Wangan Expressway at 1 a.m. was everything illegal racing had ever promised. Empty lanes, city lights blurring into streaks, the feeling that if you went fast enough you could outrun your own shadow. Brian pushed the Silvia to 120 kilometers per hour, then 140, then 160. The car responded like it was part of him. Suspension hugging curves, turbo spooling with each acceleration, brakes biting when he needed them. Behind him, 3 black Lexus sedans followed. Professional drivers, Yakuza enforcers who'd done this before. Han's voice crackled through the radio. "We're taking them to Hakone, Mountain Pass. If they can drift, we're dead. If they can't, we disappear." Understood. They exited the expressway, climbing into mountain roads that twisted like serpents. Guardrails became suggestions. Drop-offs became death sentences. This was where racing stopped being a sport and became survival. Brian's hands moved on instinct, left hand guiding the wheel, right hand ready on the handbrake for emergency slides. The road demanded perfection. One miscalculation and the Sylvia would tumble off the mountain like a broken toy. The first Lexus tried to match his pace, failed, overcorrected on a hairpin turn, and slammed into the guardrail, metal shrieking as the car ground to a halt. Two left. Han was ahead now, RX-7 sliding through corners with the grace of someone who'd lived in Tokyo's racing scene for years. His tail lights blinked. A signal. Dual sync drift incoming. Brian understood immediately. Two cars, perfectly mirrored, creating a pincer trap for anyone following. The road ahead split into a Y-junction. Han went left. Brian went right. They'd rejoin on the other side, sandwiching the pursuers between them. 30 seconds of solo driving. Brian navigated blind corners with nothing but instinct and the faint memory of maps he'd studied weeks ago. The Sylvia screamed through elevation changes, suspension compressing and expanding like a living thing. The roads converged. Han appeared from the left side, Brian from the right. Perfect synchronization. The two remaining Lexus vehicles found themselves trapped between two cars moving at identical speeds, hemmed in by guardrails on both sides. Brian and Han held the formation for 10 seconds, 20, 30. Then they accelerated simultaneously, pulling away with turbo boosts the Yakuza drivers couldn't match. By the time the Lexus vehicles realized the trap, Brian and Han were already disappearing around the next corner. 5 minutes later, they parked in a hidden overlook, engines ticking as they cooled. Tokyo sprawled below like a galaxy. Han stepped out lighting another cigarette. "Not bad for a Fed." "Former Fed," Brian corrected. "You'll always be a Fed. It's in your blood. The way you analyze angles, calculate risks, trust protocols over instincts." Han exhaled. "But you're learning to think like a criminal. That's progress." Brian leaned against the Sylvia, adrenaline still singing through his veins. "How long have you been doing this? Running? Longer than you." Han's smile was enigmatic. Different reasons, different ghosts. Same result. "You ever regret it?" "Every day." Han looked at the city. "But regret doesn't change the situation. Only action does." Encrypted message. Not from Cipher. Not from Hobbs. From Dom. "Landing at Narita tomorrow. 1400 hours. We need to talk." Brian's heart stopped. "Dom's coming to Tokyo," he said quietly. Han nodded, unsurprised. "Figured he would eventually." "I told him not to. I told him it was too dangerous. And he ignored you because that's what family does." Han crushed his cigarette under his boot. "Question is, are you going to keep running from the people trying to help you, or are you going to let them in? If Dom comes here, he becomes a target. He was always a target. You just delayed the inevitable." Han walked back to his RX-7. "Brian, you're one of the best drivers I've ever met. You understand cars, roads, physics, but you don't understand people nearly as well. What's that supposed to mean?" "It means Dom didn't come all the way to Tokyo because he's stupid. He came because he knows something you don't. You can't win this fight alone." Han opened his car door. "The question isn't whether he should be here. The question is whether you're strong enough to accept the help." Han drove off, taillights disappearing into Tokyo's neon labyrinth. Brian stood alone on the mountain overlook, phone still displaying Dom's message. Tomorrow. 1400 hours. Narita Airport. He could run. Disappear before Dom landed. Continue the solo war against Nightshade and Cipher and every agency hunting him. Or he could stay, face his brother. Accept that family wasn't something you protected by pushing away. It was something you protected by standing together. Brian made his decision. He typed a response. "Narita Arrival Terminal. 1400. Come alone." Then he added, "Mia better not be with you." Dom's reply came instantly. "She's already on the plane." Brian almost smiled. Of course she was. Family. The FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. had protocols for everything. Protocols for terrorist threats, protocols for cyber attacks, protocols for foreign espionage. But they had no protocol for what happened at 0347 hours on a Tuesday morning when every computer in the building simultaneously displayed the same message. Hello, FBI. I've been watching. Agents scrambled. Cybersecurity teams deployed. The entire building went into lockdown mode, assuming a coordinated hack from a foreign adversary. Then the second message appeared. I'm not Russian, I'm not Chinese, I'm not a terrorist. I'm Brian O'Connor, and I'm currently sitting in Director Clarkson's office. Tactical teams stormed the 7th floor, burst through the director's door with assault rifles raised, laser sights sweeping the room. Empty, except for a laptop sitting on Clarkson's desk, screen glowing with a live video feed. Brian O'Connor's face, speaking directly to the camera. By the time your teams breach this room, I'll be long gone. But I wanted to leave you with something to think about. The video continued, Brian's voice calm and professional. For the past 6 weeks, I've been inside your systems, not hacking from the outside. Inside, walking through your digital infrastructure like it's my own house. Because it used to be. On every computer screen in the building, files began downloading. Classified documents, internal communications, budget allocations. These are the files you don't want the public to see. Black budget operations, unauthorized surveillance programs, regime changes funded through taxpayer money but hidden from congressional oversight. Panic rippled through the building. I'm not releasing these to hurt you. I'm releasing them to prove a point. The people you're hunting aren't the problem. The people giving the orders are. The files continued downloading. Thousands of documents. Years of secrets. Nightshade Holdings. You know the name. You've probably taken money from them. They authorized a liquidation order against innocent people because those people embarrassed the wrong politicians. Brian's face on the screen was cold. Controlled. The face of a man who'd calculated every angle. I've spent 6 weeks dismantling their empire, seizing their assets, exposing their networks, and I've done it from inside your own walls. The final file downloaded, a complete financial breakdown of Nightshade's operations. Names, bank accounts. Shell corporations. Every piece of evidence needed to prosecute. This is my gift to you. Arrest them. Try them. Prove that the system isn't completely corrupt. Brian leaned forward, eyes boring through the camera. Or don't. And prove that I was right to become the enemy. The video ended. The laptop's hard drive began to smoke. Self-destruct mechanism. Within seconds, it melted into useless slag. But the damage was done. Every major news network had received copies of the files. WikiLeaks, The Guardian, The New York Times. Within an hour, the Nightshade revelations would be global news. Director Clarkson stood in his office, surrounded by tactical teams who'd found nothing, staring at the molten remains of a laptop that had just destroyed his career. Find him, Clarkson said quietly. Find Brian O'Connor. I don't care if you have to burn every city on Earth. Find him. In Tokyo, Brian watched the news coverage on a burner phone, standing on the roof of Han's garage as the world exploded with revelations. CNN was running the Nightshade documents as breaking news. BBC was interviewing intelligence experts about the implications. Social media was on fire with hashtags like #Nightshade exposed and #Brian was right. The narrative was shifting. Not completely. Brian was still wanted, still labeled a fugitive. But now, questions were being asked. Investigations were being launched. Congressional committees were scheduling hearings. Nightshade's empire was crumbling, and Brian had done it without firing a single shot. His phone buzzed. Hobbs, Brian answered without speaking. You just declared war on I'm exposing enemies that already existed. Brian's voice was calm. How long have you known about Nightshade, Hobbs? How long have you been following orders from people who authorized murder? Silence. That's what I thought. Brian walked to the edge of the roof. You're a good man, Hobbs. Better than most. But you're trapped in a bad system. And until you decide to break free, you're part of the problem. And what about you? What are you? I'm the guy who chose family over the badge. I'm the guy who made himself the monster so his family could be free. And I'm the guy who's going to keep fighting until every corrupt official who signed that liquidation order is behind bars. Or dead. I don't kill people, Hobbs. I'm not them. Another pause. Then, the task force is being reassigned. Half my team is getting pulled to deal with the Nightshade fallout. I've got maybe 72 hours before this whole operation gets shut down. So what are you going to do at those 72 hours? I don't know yet. Hobbs sounded tired. Part of me wants to find you and bring you in. Prove that the system still works, that justice isn't just a word. And the other part wants to shake your hand and buy you a beer. Brian almost smiled. Rain check on that beer. But Hobbs, thank you. For what? For being one of the good ones. The line went dead. Brian stood on the roof as Tokyo woke below him, city lights fading as dawn approached. Somewhere in that sprawl, Mia and Dom were landing at Narita in 8 hours. Somewhere, Cipher was planning her next move. Somewhere, what remained of Nightshade was scrambling to salvage their operations. But for this moment, just this moment, Brian allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in 6 weeks. Hope. Maybe he couldn't win this war. Maybe he'd die before seeing his family again outside an airport terminal. Maybe Cipher or Nightshade or some other enemy would catch him eventually. But he'd made a difference. The files were public. The truth was out. And the empire built on corruption was falling. Whatever happened next, Brian O'Connor had proven something crucial. One person, fighting for the right reasons, could change everything. Even if that person was the most wanted man alive. Below, Han emerged onto the roof carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Brian without a word, standing beside him as they watched the sun rise over Tokyo. The news is calling you a hero in some places, Han said, a terrorist in others. I don't care what they call me. As long as my family is safe, they're landing in 8 hours. I know. You're ready for that conversation. Brian thought about Mia's face when she saw him, Dom's eyes searching for the truth, the questions he'd have to answer and the ones he couldn't. No, Brian admitted, but I'm done running from the people who matter. Han nodded. That's growth. They stood in silence as Tokyo transformed from neon darkness into morning light. Somewhere below, millions of people were waking up to news of Nightshade's exposure. Journalists were writing stories. Politicians were scrambling. The machinery of accountability was grinding to life. Brian had set it all in motion, and now he had to face his family and explain why becoming the most wanted man alive was the only way to keep them breathing. His phone buzzed one final time, unknown number, but Brian recognized the encryption pattern. Cipher. He almost didn't open it, almost threw the phone off the roof and watched it shatter 40 stories below, but curiosity was still a weapon. The message was short, impressive, but you just made yourself a bigger target than Nightshade ever was. Sleep well, Brian. Brian deleted the message, looked at Han. Cipher? Han asked. Cipher. What did she want? To remind me that the game's not over. Brian finished his coffee. But I already knew that. You need to leave Tokyo after the airport meeting. Too many people know you're here now. Where would I go? Han smiled slightly. I know a place. Off the grid, where ghosts go when they need to disappear for real. Spain? I've got connections in Tangier. They don't ask questions, and they don't talk to feds. Brian nodded. The plan was already forming. Meet Dom and Mia at the airport, explain everything, then disappear again before Cipher, or what remained of Nightshade, could triangulate his position. Always moving, always one step ahead. It was exhausting. But it was keeping his family alive, and that made it worth every sleepless night. 8 hours, Brian said. Then everything changes again. Everything's always changing, Han replied. The question is whether you're changing with it or getting left behind. Brian looked at the sunrise painting Tokyo in shades of gold and orange. Somewhere in that city, his family was about to land. Somewhere in the world, enemies were plotting his death. Somewhere, the truth he'd exposed was burning through the lies. But right now, on this roof, watching dawn break over a city that had given him shelter, Brian O'Connor felt something close to peace. It wouldn't last, but for this moment, it was enough. The meeting point was a bridge in Ronda, Spain, not Tokyo, not Los Angeles, not anywhere Brian or Dom had history. Neutral ground, away from surveillance, away from the chaos Brian had unleashed with the Nightshade files. Brian arrived first, having traveled from Tokyo through 5 different countries, using passports that would evaporate from databases within hours. He stood at the center of the Puente Nuevo Bridge, ancient stone beneath his boots, 390 feet of empty air below. The sun was setting, painting the gorge in shades of amber and blood. He heard the car before he saw it. Familiar engine rumble, the Charger Brian had built for Dom, modified and perfect. Dom parked at the bridge entrance, stepped out, walked toward Brian with the measured pace of a man who'd traveled 8,000 miles for this conversation and wasn't going to rush it. They stood 10 feet apart, brothers separated by choices neither had wanted to make. "You look like hell," Dom said. "You look like Los Angeles." Brian's voice was rough from weeks of silence and evasion. "How's Mia?" "Alive because of you. Angry because of you. Worried because of you." Dom's eyes were hard. "Take your pick. I told you not to come, and I told you family doesn't work that way." Dom closed the distance, and suddenly they weren't 10 feet apart. They were face to face, close enough to see exhaustion and determination and something that looked like grief. "I had to protect you," Brian said. "By making yourself the enemy? By taking on the entire federal government alone?" Dom's voice rose. "You think that's what family does? Sacrifice without asking? Disappear without explaining?" "I didn't have time to explain. The liquidation order gave me 48 hours. If I'd waited, if I'd tried to save everyone, we'd all be dead. So you saved us by destroying yourself?" "I didn't destroy myself. I evolved." Brian's jaw set. "I became exactly what I needed to be to keep you alive. A fugitive, a traitor, the most wanted man on Earth. Yes." Dom hit him, not hard, not in anger, but with enough force to snap Brian's head sideways and split his lip. Brian didn't fight back, just took it, tasting blood, eyes never leaving Dom's face. "You don't get to make that choice alone," Dom said quietly. "You don't get to decide you're expendable, and we're not. That's not how brotherhood works." "Then how does it work?" Brian's voice cracked. "You tell me, Dom. Because I've spent 6 weeks running and fighting and bleeding to keep you safe. And you're angry that I did it alone? I'm angry that you thought you had to." The words hung in the air. Behind them, a second car approached. Not the Charger, something smaller, faster. Han's RX-7. Han stepped out, followed by Mia. Brian's heart stopped. Mia walked onto the bridge like she owned it, eyes locked on Brian with the intensity of someone who'd spent weeks imagining this moment. "You don't get to decide for me what's safe," she said, voice shaking. "You don't get to walk away and call it protection. Mia, I'm not done." She closed the distance, standing between Brian and Dom. "I know what you did. I know why you did it. And I understand the sacrifice." Brian started to speak. "But," Mia continued, cutting him off, "you forgot something crucial. We're a family, and families fight together, or not at all." Brian looked at the 3 of them, Dom, Mia, Han, all standing on a bridge in Spain when they should have been scattered and safe. "I can't protect you if you're with me," Brian said quietly. "We don't need your protection," Dom replied. "We need your trust." This one Brian recognized immediately. DSS tactical vehicle, Hobbs. Brian's hand moved toward his weapon, but Dom caught his wrist. "He's with us." "What?" Hobbs stepped out, alone, no tactical team, no backup. He walked onto the bridge with the careful movements of someone entering a truce they didn't entirely trust. "O'Connor," Hobbs said by way of greeting. "Hobbs." Brian's voice was wary. "This a trap? If it was a trap, you'd already be in zip ties." Hobbs pulled out a tablet. "I've got something you need to see." The tablet displayed surveillance footage. A warehouse, 3 figures moving with military precision. "We tracked what's left of Nightshade's operations to a mobile command center," Hobbs explained. "They're planning something big. Response to the files you leaked. They're going scorched earth, trying to eliminate everyone who knows too much." "Including you?" Brian asked. "Including everyone in a 50-mile radius of their operation." Hobbs zoomed in on the footage. "This isn't about covering tracks anymore. This is about sending a message. Cross Nightshade, and they burn everything you love." Dom studied the footage. "Where's the command center?" "Moving through the Spanish countryside. Armored convoy. 20 vehicles. Armed to the teeth." Hobbs looked at Brian. I can't touch them officially. Jurisdictional nightmare. Political complications. My hands are tied. Unofficially, I'm a guy who's tired of watching corrupt people win because good people follow rules. Hobbs's smile was cold. So I'm offering a temporary alliance. You help me take down this convoy. I help you stay breathing long enough to finish what you started. Why should I trust you? Because I read the full Nightshade files. All of them, including the part where they ordered hits on federal agents who got too close to their operations. Hobbs's voice went flat. I lost 2 friends to training accidents last year. Turns out they weren't accidents. The personal was always more powerful than the political. Brian looked at Dom, then Mia, then Han. This is suicide, Brian said. 20 armored vehicles, professional operators. We'd be massively outgunned, so we don't fight them head-on, Dom replied, the tactical mind that had pulled off impossible heists already working. We do what we do best. A heist? Mia asked. A takedown. Dom's smile was sharp, fast and furious style. The convoy moved through Spanish countryside like a mechanical serpent. 20 black vehicles in perfect formation, communication systems encrypted, every operator armed and ready. Nightshade's last mobile command center. The final piece of an empire Brian had spent weeks dismantling. Inside the lead vehicle, the convoy commander reviewed the mission briefing. Eliminate all witnesses, destroy all evidence, disappear before authorities could respond. Standard protocol. He didn't see the 2 cars approaching from opposite directions on the mountain road ahead. Brian, driving the Sylvia Han had lent him. Dom, driving the Charger Brian had built. Ready? Brian's voice came through encrypted radio. Always, Dom replied. They accelerated simultaneously. The convoy commander saw them coming. Dismissed them as civilians who'd clear the road once they saw the armored vehicles. He was wrong. Brian and Dom aimed directly at the convoy. Not slowing, not veering, 60 miles per hour, 70, 80. The convoy tried to scatter, but mountain roads didn't allow for evasive maneuvers. They were locked in formation. Brian and Dom hit the convoy from both sides, but instead of crashing, they jumped. Launch ramps hidden in the roadside. Hobbs' contribution positioned hours earlier based on convoy intelligence. Both cars went airborne. Time seemed to suspend. Brian's Sylvia crossed over the convoy from the left. Dom's Charger crossed from the right. Mid-air, they passed each other. The synchronized impact was devastating. Brian's car landed on the rear third of the convoy. Dom's hit the front third. The middle vehicles, including the command center, were suddenly isolated. Behind them, Han drove an EMP-rigged truck directly into the convoy's center, electromagnetic pulse erupting across a 100-yard radius. Every electronic system died. Engines, communication, weapons targeting. The convoy was now 20 very expensive pieces of disabled metal. Hobbs arrived with his tactical team, moving in professionally to secure the vehicles and extract operators who were just starting to understand what had happened. Brian and Dom climbed out of their cars, both vehicles damaged but intact. They stood on the mountain road watching Hobbs's team work. That was insane, Dom said. That was necessary, Brian replied. Behind them, Mia approached with the tablet, pulling data from the command center's servers before the EMP fully corrupted them. Names, operations, final proof of Nightshade's reach. Got everything, she confirmed. Han lit a cigarette, surveying the chaos. Not bad for a family reunion. Hobbs walked over, hands covered in zip-tie plastic from securing prisoners. This never happened. Officially? But unofficially? He extended a hand to Brian. Brian hesitated, then shook it. Thank you, Hobbs said simply. For what? For reminding me why I became an agent in the first place. Hobbs looked at the disabled convoy. Justice, not politics. A laser sight appeared on Dom's chest. Red dot. Sniper scope. Brian saw it first. Reacted on instinct. He threw himself in front of Dom just as the shot rang out. The bullet hit Brian's shoulder. Not lethal, but enough to spin him sideways and send him crashing to the pavement. Hobbs' team scattered, searching for the shooter. Found nothing. Whoever it was had taken one shot and vanished. Dom dropped beside Brian, pressing his jacket against the wound to slow the bleeding. Why did you do that? Dom's voice was raw. Because you're my brother. Brian's words came out through gritted teeth. And brothers protect each other. Brian grabbed Dom's arm with his good hand, pulling him close enough to whisper, "They'll keep coming. Nightshade, Cipher, everyone we've made enemies of, this doesn't end until we finish it." "Then we finish it," Dom said, "together." Brian tried to smile, but pain made it more of a grimace. "Took you long enough to figure that out. Took you long enough to let me help." The medical helicopter arrived within minutes, Hobbs doing resources he positioned specifically for this possibility. As they loaded Brian onto a stretcher, he looked up at Dom. "The files Mia pulled. There's something in them you need to see." "What?" "Proof." Brian's eyes were fading from blood loss, but his voice stayed focused. "Proof that Nightshade was just the visible part. There's something bigger behind them? Worse." Brian's hand found a tablet in his jacket, passing it to Dom with trembling fingers. "Remember how I said this doesn't end? I was wrong. It ends when we cut the head off the snake." Dom opened the tablet, found encrypted files that made his blood run cold. Names, connections, a shadow organization that made Nightshade look like amateurs. And at the center of it all, a single notation: Project Nightfall. Pays 2. Whatever Brian had exposed with the FBI hack was just the beginning. The real war was about to start. 3 months later, Brian woke at a safe house in the Dominican Republic, shoulder healed but scarred, surrounded by family he tried to protect by pushing away. Dom was cooking breakfast. Mia was reviewing financial accounts. Tej was running security protocols. Roman was complaining about something. Han was silent in the corner, watching everything. Normal? Or as normal as their family ever got. "You awake?" Dom asked without turning from the stove. "Yeah." Brian sat up, testing his shoulder. Range of motion was back. Pain was manageable. "What did I miss?" 3 months of physical therapy, 2 congressional hearings, and Hobbs getting promoted to deputy director after exposing the Nightshade network. He deserves it. He sends his regards, also said if you ever need backup, call him. Dom brought over coffee. "We've got a problem. Just one. Cipher's made contact. Says she knows where Project Nightfall Phase 2 is being launched. Says she wants to help us stop it." Brian's hand tightened on the coffee mug. "That's a trap. Probably." Dom sat across from him, but she attached evidence. Real evidence. Locations, names, timeline. "Why would she help us?" "Because Phase 2 isn't just about controlling surveillance networks, it's about controlling governments. And apparently, even Cipher has limits to what she'll tolerate." Brian processed that. "Where's the launch happening?" "Constantly moving. But Cipher claims she can triangulate the location if we give her 72 hours. And in exchange, she wants us to destroy it. Completely. No survivors, no evidence. Total annihilation. That's not how we operate." "I know." Dom's eyes were hard. "But I'm starting to think maybe it should be." Mia stepped in, carrying the tablet Brian had given Dom 3 months ago. "I've been analyzing the Phase 2 files. It's worse than we thought." She pulled up blueprints. A mobile command center 10 times the size of the convoy they destroyed. Armed with technology that could hijack satellite networks, banking systems, power grids. "This isn't about surveillance," Mia explained. "This is about total control. Whoever controls Phase 2 can shut down entire countries." "And they're launching in 72 hours, Dom added. Brian stood, testing his shoulder's full range. The pain was there, but manageable. "Then we've got 72 hours to plan the biggest heist we've ever attempted." "Not a heist," Tej corrected, walking in with his laptop. "A military strike. We're talking about assaulting a mobile fortress with security that makes Fort Knox look like a convenience store." "So we do what we've always done," Roman said, finally contributing something useful. "We don't play their game. We change the game." The people he'd tried to protect by becoming the monster. "All right," he said, "let's talk strategy." The operation took every skill they'd ever learned. Dom's tactical planning, Brian's federal training, Tej's technical expertise, Roman's improvisational chaos, Han's connections, Mia's coordination, Hobbs's resources. And one element they'd never used before, Cipher's intelligence. She delivered on her promise. 72 hours before launch, she provided exact coordinates for the mobile command center's route through the Sahara Desert. "Why are you helping us?" Brian asked during an encrypted video call. Cipher's face was hidden, voice modulated, because Phase 2 represents everything I oppose. Crude control, blunt force. They want to dominate through fear. I prefer subtlety. You're still a criminal. And you're still a federal agent playing at being a fugitive. Cipher's smile was audible even through voice modulation. "We're both hypocrites, Brian. The difference is I admit it." The call ended. Brian didn't trust her, would never trust her. But he'd use her intelligence because the stakes were too high to let pride interfere. The Sahara Desert at dawn was beautiful and merciless. The mobile command center moved like a fortress on wheels. 50 vehicles in coordinated formation, armed guards, drone surveillance, enough firepower to level a small city. Phase 2's launch was scheduled for noon. The Toretto crew had 6 hours. They approached from 4 directions simultaneously. Brian and Dom from the east, driving modified rally cars designed for desert terrain. Tej and Roman from the west, piloting a cargo helicopter carrying the EMP payload. Han from the north, on a motorcycle with precision explosives, Mia coordinating from a mobile command station, feeding them real-time intelligence. And Hobbs, officially off-duty but coordinating satellite surveillance that accidentally provided blind spots in the convoy's coverage. Remember the plan? Dom's voice came through encrypted comms. "We're not trying to destroy them. We're trying to stop the launch." No, destroying them leaves evidence. Stopping the launch leaves questions. Brian's tactical mind was already working 3 steps ahead. We hit the command center, extract the launch codes, disappear before they know what happened. "And if they know what's happening?" Tej asked. "Then we improvise." The convoy was 2 miles away, 1 mile, half a mile. Brian and Dom accelerated, desert sand kicking up behind their vehicles like rooster tails. The convoy spotted them, defensive formation activated. Armed guards raised weapons. But Brian and Dom weren't attacking the convoy. They were attacking the ground beneath it. Hands explosives, planted hours earlier along the convoy's predetermined route, detonated in sequence. Not large explosions, shaped charges designed to destabilize the sand underneath the convoy's path. The ground collapsed. 50 vehicles suddenly found themselves driving into a manufactured sinkhole, formations breaking, chaos erupting. Tej's helicopter swooped in, dropping the EMP payload directly into the sinkhole's center. Electromagnetic pulse erupted across a quarter-mile radius. Every electronic system died. The convoy was now 50 pieces of very expensive, very useless metal sitting in a hole in the desert. Brian and Dom drove straight into the chaos, targeting the central command vehicle. Found it immobilized but intact. Brian kicked in the door. Inside, 3 operators scrambling to activate backup systems. They looked up, saw Brian, reached for weapons. Brian was faster. Non-lethal takedowns. Professional. 30 seconds later, all 3 operators were unconscious. Brian accessed the command terminal, pulling the launch codes, and uploading a virus that would corrupt Phase 2's entire network infrastructure. "Got them?" he confirmed through comms. "Exfil in 90 seconds, Mia's voice responded. "I'm reading reinforcements incoming." Brian grabbed the hard drive containing the launch codes and ran. Dom was waiting outside, engine running. They drove out of the sinkhole, Han providing motorcycle escort, Tej's helicopter offering air cover. Behind them, the convoy was starting to recover. Backup generators kicking in. Armed guards organizing pursuit. But the Toretto crew was already gone, disappearing into the desert like ghosts. 12 hours later, they were in Casablanca, sitting in a beachside cafe watching the sunset. The launch codes had been delivered to Hobbs. Phase 2 was permanently offline. The shadow organization behind Nightshade was in chaos, their plans exposed, their resources depleted. "Is it over?" Mia asked. Dom looked at Brian. Brian looked at the ocean. "Nothing's ever over," Brian said quietly, "but this chapter is." "So what's next?" Roman asked. "We gonna finally retire? Buy that island I keep talking about?" "You never stop talking about it," Tej muttered. Han lit a cigarette. "I'm going back to Tokyo. Got some cars that need attention. And us?" Mia looked between Dom and Brian. Dom raised his beer. "We do what family does. We live. We protect each other. And when the world tries to tear us apart, we prove them wrong." Brian raised his beer, touching it to Dom's. "Ride or die." "Ride or die," Dom confirmed. They drank as the sun set over Casablanca. Family reunited. War finished, future uncertain, but faced together. Brian's phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. Then he saw the message. Well played, O'Connor. But the game's far from over. See, Cipher. Brian deleted the message and threw the phone into the ocean. Whatever came next, whatever enemies remained, whatever battles still needed fighting, he wouldn't face them alone, because family wasn't a word, it was a promise, and the Toretto family always kept their promises. The FBI removed Brian O'Connor from the 10 most wanted list, not officially, not publicly, but quietly, through bureaucratic channels, a classified memo that stated, "Target no longer poses active threat. Recommend surveillance only." Hobbs had made the case, argued that Brian's actions had exposed more corruption than any federal investigation could have uncovered, presented evidence that Brian had never actually committed terrorism, just exposed those who had. The recommendation was accepted. Brian was still wanted, still technically a fugitive, but the manhunt was over. He'd never be free, not completely, but he'd never be alone. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Somewhere in the Dominican Republic, on a beach where the ocean met the sky, Dom and Brian sat with cold beers and warm memories. "You know they're still watching," Dom said. "I know. Brian took a drink beer on a beach with my brother. I'll take that over running for the rest of my life. Think Cipher will come back? Definitely." Brian's smile was cold. "But next time, we'll be ready. Next time," Dom corrected, "we'll end it." They touched beers. Brothers. Family. Forever. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Waves crashed against the shore in endless rhythm. Somewhere behind them, Mia laughed at something Roman said. Tage was already planning their next move, whatever that would be. Brian O'Connor had become the most wanted criminal alive to save his family, and in doing so, he'd found something he'd been searching for since the day he went undercover in Los Angeles all those years ago. He'd found home. Not a place, not a building, but people. The ones who stood beside you when the world turned against you, the ones who trusted you even when the evidence said they shouldn't, the ones who would drive into hell itself if it meant bringing you back. That was family. That was everything. Brian looked at Dom, his brother in every way that mattered, and realized something profound. He'd spent 6 weeks as the ghost, the fugitive, the monster, but he'd never stopped being Brian O'Connor. And Brian O'Connor was finally home. The end.